Okay, welcome to my presentation. My name is Asia Miller and I will be talking about the international components of criminal justice. So to start off today, we're going to go through a quick little activity. I'm going to ask a question, and if this applies to you, just raise your hand. Okay, so how many of you have been out of the country before? Okay. How many of you have been out of Wisconsin? Okay. Raise your hand if you were nervous about traveling either out of the state for the first time or the country. Okay. Raise your hand if you researched any laws or rules about where you were traveling to prior to going. Okay. And then raise your hand if you ever had an experience with law enforcement while traveling. And then do you want to explain? You don't have to.
Just that it totally was at Customs or Immigration Patrol just when you come into the airports and they're checking. So I didn't have any other issues with police anywhere
Okay.
in the country.
Well, that actually, I'm kind of glad that you brought that up. That actually does count. And then, did you have something you wanted to say? Or?
Yeah, when I was overseas in Miyako, Jima, Ryukyu Islands, the police there did not carry weapons, they carried batons.
Okay, yeah. So basically, what this activity did is each question somehow related back to policing or criminal justice in some sort of way, and the two examples that you guys described shows like that it's an international policing thing, which is what I'm going to be talking about today during my presentation. I'm a criminal justice major, also an international studies major, so I'm hoping to combine the two majors and do criminal justice but on an international level or working with different countries. So I hope you guys enjoy. Okay, so first of all, the enhancements that I have today are the PowerPoint itself, the true-false worksheet, the chart of fragile state index, as well as I have 3 short video clips for you guys. Okay, so just a quick outline of what I'm going to present to you guys today are the basic components of an effective criminal justice system, which are going to include 4 basic components, which are going to be laws, the protection of laws, the courts, and then punishment. And then I'm going to briefly describe the fragile state index to you guys, which is what I've used throughout my research to rank different countries. And then I'm going to talk about different international institutions or organizations that are related to criminal justice and bring in all these components, which will be the United Nations, Interpol, the ICC, Europol, Eurojust, and then I'm going to end with Amnesty International. And with further ado, first we're going to start with the basic components, which again are the laws, and then the guardians or the protectors of laws, so law enforcement or police. And then we're going to go through the court system and then punishments. So starting with the laws, basically there are a few things that laws should strive to do, and that should be to ensure citizens' well-being, to make sure that everyone is safe, and that can be from everyday things such as OWI or drunk driving, so getting the danger out of the picture, and then it can be more it'll be more stealth crimes, which could be like white collar or non-violent crimes, but they still cause a lot of havoc if someone has cleaned out your bank account, up to large-scale threats, which could be like terrorism. And then another piece that the laws do is that they protect citizens' freedoms, or that's what they should strive to do. And so for freedoms, you know, like that can be a lot of different things: the right to protest against the government, all of the freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of petition, all of those basic things which in the US we're accustomed to. And then they should also protect basic human rights, and that's again just equality all across the board. So equality regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, disability, anything that you can really think of. Moving on, the next component that a criminal justice system needs to have is police, or someone to enforce the laws and the rules. And so when I was doing my research, this component was one of the components that needed a lot of work globally. A lot of citizens in different countries were criticizing this aspect or this component of the justice system, and they were saying that there's not really fair treatment to everyone, and so that's something that they said that police can work on. And so again, that's not having any biases, no classism, no discrimination of race, gender, age, any of that, as well as no corruption, which can be as small from just taking bribes from gangs or even stealing evidence such as money or drugs, to higher up kind of organized crime where certain gangs are making deals with public officials or government officials. So just trying to combat all of that. And then one other large criticism across the board was the use of force. A lot of people have complained that it should only be used when necessary. There needs to be excessive training on it so that people and police officers know when and how to use it. And then there needs to be standards set up that, again, equal it across the board for everyone. And the US actually does a really good job with that, with the use of force continuum, which I included here, which goes from level 1 to level 5. Level 1 is just having a police presence around, up to level 5, which is deadly force only when absolutely necessary. Moving on to the courts, they're saying that the courts should also have a right to trial. Everyone should have that right to be able to hear what the charges are being brought against them, so that you don't have any political prisoners just being imprisoned because they disagree with the government. They should be able to confront their accuser, as well as a fair judgment, so there again should be no discrimination by the judge, by the prosecution. There also shouldn't be any bribery of the judge, prosecution, or jury for one way or the other. And then there should also be the ability to petition or appeal one's sentence, so that if one is falsely charged, they aren't stuck in prison for years and years. They should also have equal access to a competent attorney, and basically they should need to have the right to have a defense regardless of their income, their race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and the things like that. The next component is punishment. So for punishment, basically the punishment needs to be fair and equal to the crime that's being committed, and that takes into aggravating and mitigating circumstances. Whether the crime was violent or non-violent, a drug crime versus a murder, for example, the history of the offender, whether this was their first offense or whether they've committed crimes like this before, as well as the type of victim. As we know, a lot of child cases, or where the victim was a child, the offender is going to get more time typically because of that. And then also for the justification, the necessity of the act, whether or not it was self-defense or if the person had to in order to protect themselves. And then after that, there's also the thing of solitary confinement, how the offender is being treated if they are incarcerated or imprisoned. In some cases, there have been starvation or torture tactics that have been used in different countries, which again is not okay. It's against human rights. As well as the death penalty. The death penalty, again, has been ruled inhumane by numerous organizations. And all options need to be weighed for the offender. So like what's best for them, whether it's incarceration or probation, rehab if they have an addiction, or if they need to go to counseling or therapy to help with underlying issues from their past, community service, or whether they have other struggles and they need to, if they could be better, be helped by having a mental health referral. Okay, so now we're going to do a quick little activity. I think you guys have your worksheets. I'm going to give you guys about 3 minutes to fill those out. You guys can either work alone or together, and then we'll come back and I'll give you guys the answers.
All right. I don't have a pen. I know, I think you gave me a pen, but I've lost it. Thank you. You just do yours and then I'll do mine. Thank you. Was it recording? Oh.
You guys all
Alright.
finished?
Yeah.
Okay. So, number 1, that's actually true. Number 2 is false. The US, it's not in the top 10. It is in the top 50 though. Number 3 is true, with a side note of England and Greece. They are exceptions. They did not improve over the past 5 years. However, both England and Greece are still ranked better or higher than the US. And also the exception side note for the EU, England is no longer in the EU. For number 4, that's true. For number 5, that is also true. Number 6 is true. Actually, the UN has over 80 different declarations and treaties related to human rights. Number 7 is false. That was actually in 1948 after World War II. Number 8 is true. Number 9 is true, and that was actually the only time that the Security Council voted unanimously to take action. Number 10, that is true. Number 11 is actually false. So that's a bit tricky, but state law and state and international relations refers to countries. So country law or state law, it actually comes first. So countries are going to abide by their laws before they take on any sort of international institutions laws. So the UN does not have any binding charters per se, unless the country votes that they want to make it a law within their own country. However, sanctions sometimes work, so the UN can try to get around it. Sometimes they don't. It just kind of depends. For number 12, that is false. Actually, a lot of the peacekeepers, when they're being hired, the people are looking for people with criminal justice degrees rather than international relations. 13, that is actually true. For that, the higher position that you get within the agency, they actually require sometimes up to 5 languages that a person is fluent in. For 14, that's actually false. It's located in the Netherlands. For 15, that is also false. It was established in 1998 following the Rwandan genocide. For 16, that's true. It is the main police force of the EU. 17, that's false. It's actually only about 50%, so about half. For 18, that's true. It works with the African Union, the European Union, the United Nations, and it has 7 different regional offices throughout the world. Its main location is in France. For 19, that's true. Currently, there are 727 red notices. 20 is also true. There are actually 24 official languages of the EU. 21 is false. It actually, in this order, is Italy, Spain, and the Netherlands. 22, that is going to be true, and it was actually the first treaty to acknowledge basic human rights for the EU. Number 23 is actually false. It's located in The Hague, which is near Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And then 24 is also false. It was actually created by an English lawyer and professor when he found out that one of his Portuguese students was arrested for toasting to freedom.
Question?
Yeah.
What was the answer to 4 again? I'm sorry.
4 was true.
Okay.
Okay. So then, moving on, we're going to jump into the international components a bit more. So, I mentioned the Fragile State Index earlier, and a lot of organizations such as the UN and the EU use this to rank countries based on how well they perform in certain areas. This is called the security apparatus, which is basically a fancy word for policing. And so when the Fragile State Index measures countries, these are some of the guidelines that they look for. This is not all of them. I just put in a couple that I thought were the most important, I guess. So that would be the security threat level to the country, criminal factors, like types of crime, whether it's homicide or just like smaller crime, I guess, kind of like drug crime. How the citizens perceive their trust in security, accusations of police brutality, whether proper police force or use of force is being used, the availability of weapons in a country, professionalism of the police, and then whether violence is domestic or international. That's a little caveat. If it's domestic, then their score is going to be lower. If it's international, it's a bit higher because the argument is they can't really protect against that, which is debatable. So after that, here's the rankings. So countries can score the same amount of points because it's on a point system, so they can tie for places. So the country that's actually ranked the highest for policing is Iceland at number 1. And for second place, it was actually a 3-country tie. So Portugal, Singapore, and Slovenia all tied for second place. And then Switzerland was ranked 3rd. And then just to kind of give you guys a little comparison, I also included the last 3 positions of the rankings. So Yemen and Afghanistan are the tied for worst. Yemen is currently going through a civil war, and Afghanistan just got done with the war, and they're under a very brutal regime right now, the Taliban. Syria, again, also going through war, and then South Sudan has had a lot of problems since its creation a couple of years ago as a country. So the other factor that I looked for my project was human rights, which includes the laws, the court system, and the Human Rights Index guidelines. This is what I looked at again for like courts and a little bit of the punishment section. And so the considerations for this are going to be the denial of due process, the evidence of suspended or manipulated democratic processes, so that's kind of like authoritarian regimes almost, the harassment of the press, legal and political rights abuses, as well as if religious extremism exists, if there's reports of torture throughout the country, if there's reports of child labor or forced labor or slavery. That's going to be taken into account, whether there's equal access to information, as well as whether the trials are being fair and equal, as we talked about earlier, and then reports of arbitrary arrests, as well as how the prison conditions are, whether solitary is being used, and stuff like that. So the rankings for that, I just included the top 3, and so number 1 for human rights is actually Finland. For 2, it was tied between Germany and New Zealand, got the same score, And then for 3, it was Austria, Norway, and Sweden. As you guys can tell, with the exception of New Zealand, all these countries are in Northern Europe or Western Europe. So that might be a place to look at for reforms in this sector. So then moving on, international institutions play a large role in helping equalize the system in a way and providing reforms and suggestions for specific countries. So what we're going to talk about are the United Nations, the ICC, Interpol, Europol, Eurojust, and then we'll end with Amnesty International. So starting with the UN, they have a bunch of sustainable goals. I think it's over 30 right now. And Goal 16 really focuses on the criminal justice system. It's called Peace, Justice, and Strong Institutions. And they dedicated an entire kind of charter to it. So I thought that would be worth mentioning. And I just listed a couple of points. The document is actually very long, but it applies a lot to the basic components of criminal justice. So I'm just going to read them quick. Significantly reduce all forms of violence and related death rates everywhere. End abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against and torture of children. Promote the rule of law at the national and international level and ensure equal access to justice for all. By 2030, so in 10 years, significantly reduce illicit financial and arms flows, strengthen the recovery and return of stolen assets, and combat all forms of organized crime. Substantially reduce corruption and bribery in all of their forms. Develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels. Ensure public access to information and protect fundamental freedoms in accordance with national legislation and international agreements. And then finally, strengthen relevant national institutions, including through international cooperation for building capacity at all levels, in particular in developing countries, to prevent violence and combat terrorism and crime. And so with that, I'm going to show you guys a quick little video about that the UN put together in accordance with this goal. Okay. So then the UN as an organization, basically it was created, as you guys found out, through the True-False activity after the Second World War. And it basically wanted to bring peace to all of the countries so that nothing like the World War would happen again. And they created the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and basically it's a list of fundamental rights that every human being has. And the UN also relies on criminal justice systems everywhere to protect these rights and tries to hold them accountable. That's what the declaration stated. And then to help further this into the 21st century, the UN works with multiple organizations to ensure that these rights are being followed and respected in a way. And they work very closely with the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. and with fair legal processes as well. And they also are one of the largest organizations that refers cases to the ICC, to the International Criminal Court, to be further investigated and charged. And then these are a few quotes that I found on the UN website that I really liked that pertain to criminal justice. It said, among the institutions most affected by corruption are the judiciary and the police. Corruption, bribery, theft, and tax evasion cost about $1.26 trillion for developing countries per year. And then the proportion of prisoners held in detention without sentencing has remained almost constant in the last decade at 31% of all prisoners, which is almost a third. Going back, I have a quick little video for you guys for the International Criminal Court.
Access to justice means fair trials. When you can be protected regardless of social status, gender, religion, or race.
When justice is linked to helping victims rebuild their lives.
When you have information at your fingertips about your rights.
Okay. So then the next organization is Interpol, which basically has been called the International Police or the Worldwide Police. Their job is to basically distribute crime information among countries, between countries, to help in a bunch of different criminal investigations that happen to be international. They work towards shared goals of preventing crimes and criminal activity. And I highlighted a few different programs that they work on that I think are fairly important. And so the first is drug crimes. They have a whole task force dedicated to drug crimes throughout the world. Right now they're combating synthetic opioids, mainly fentanyl in North America, and tramadol is really large right now, or prevalent in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. They also work a lot with human trafficking, which is where this picture is taken, and it happens all over, from anywhere from Bangladesh to Mexico to Nigeria. And I believe this is a public service announcement that says human trafficking is modern day slavery, and I believe that this was actually posted in the US because it says Mexico to Miami, and it was just kind of it wants to get citizens, like everyday citizens, to kind of like realize that it's happening and to kind of be aware of like your surroundings a bit more. So if you can catch it and help, that's the goal. And then they also work a lot with terrorist activities, and lately, since 9/11, it has been focused on Islamic extremism. However, that's obviously not the only category, so there's tons of different terrorist organizations throughout the world that Interpol keeps tabs on. And here is kind of like their global policing goals. Right now they have 7. The first one is counter the threat of terrorism. Number 2 is promotes border integrity worldwide. 3 is to protect vulnerable communities. 4 is to secure cyberspace. 5 is to promote global integrity. 6 is to curb illicit markets. And then 7 is to support environmental security and sustainability, which is their newest one. I have a quick little video for you guys about Interpol from the president or the general secretary of Interpol.
The dialogue is about exchanging knowledge, forging partnerships, and ultimately, and most importantly, working together to tackle transnational crimes. Around the world, we are witnessing foreign terrorist fighter returnees become radicalization agents or active players in attacks. The global drug market is reaching record levels, impacting on our communities and generating billions for organized crime groups. These threats, combined with increased technological and geopolitical uncertainties, are leading to an even more complex international security environment. We need to be united in order to face these challenges, and the dialogue Interpol began in 2016 is an important part of this process.
Okay, so then next is the International Criminal Court, which again is separate from the UN. However, they work very, very closely with the UN, and they actually only operate in 4 areas. So basically, they investigate individuals who commit high-profile crimes on a transnational scale in 1 of 4 areas. So it's usually typically like heads of state or leaders of state, very prominent people in the world institution or world system. The first area is genocide. For a historical example, I put the Holocaust because it's one of the more widely known. However, the ICC was not around during the Holocaust or after it, directly after the Nuremberg trials. So it was only created after the Rwandan genocide, so that's a more modern day example. But since then, it has now decided to investigate genocide claims or crimes. They also investigate war crimes. An example of this would be the Turkish President Erdogan, his actions against the Kurdish ethnic group, the people in Syria and in Turkey. He's just killing them. And then crimes against humanity. An example of this would be the Syrian President Assad and his use of chemical weapons on civilians throughout the Syrian civil war. And then also crimes of aggression. I wrote this down. A lot of international scholars acknowledge this. Russia's annexation of Crimea. However, that's probably never going to actually get charged because Russia is on the UN Security Council, and they have a veto vote, and so they're not going to bring that to the International Criminal Court. So an example of a crime of aggression that was tried and charged was Saddam Hussein from Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. And referrals usually come from countries or from the UN. So also they have Europol and Eurojust, which are both entities of the European Union. Basically, they're developed by the European Union's Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is very close to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from the UN. Basically, Europol acts as Interpol within the context of European Union countries. It's like their main police agency. Eurojust is an agency that maintains consistent laws throughout the EU, and it investigates cases in which the law may have been broken or the Charter of Fundamental Rights was broken. Basically, both agencies want to provide protection, justice, and security for all EU citizens, and they cooperate with a lot of international agencies, including the CIA. I included this link. It is the Europol website. I was very impressed. I did not know about half of the task forces and campaigns that they did. So they do a lot of really good work in a lot of different areas of policing. So finally, I'm going to talk about Amnesty International very quickly. It's a bit different. I wanted to recognize it because most of the other organizations are governmental organizations. Amnesty is a NGO, a non-governmental organization. However, they're the leading organization globally for human rights. So I thought it was worth mentioning. Basically, their main goal is to protect human rights around the world in every country. They work very closely with the UN. They collect data and do research for the UN, and they look for human rights abuses throughout the international system. They don't discriminate. They actually have also done things within the U.S. at how we treat prisoners for solitary confinement and with the death penalty. So they're very, very fair and just all across the world. They have 4 pillars to promote international justice, and those pillars are: one is justice, which is investigating all crimes under international law that have admissible evidence. Also including providing fair trials, fair and equal trials without discrimination, eliminating the death penalty. Another pillar is truth. Within that, it's being transparent with both primary and secondary victims of crime, allowing citizens the right to know if a crime has been committed within their country. Full reparation is a third pillar. That can be restitution, compensation, or rehabilitation, which I'm sure we all learned about in our CJ classes. And then finally, the fourth pillar is the guarantee of non-reoccurrence, so making sure that it won't happen again, to address any underlying causes, whether that be discrimination, corruption, fixing it, amending laws to help fix it, or whether it involves expanding a security presence or making more protocols just to make it safer and more fair and just. So these are my references. Thank you for listening. Do you guys have any questions?
Is there one you'd like to work at?
Yeah, I've been really partial to the UN, the United Nations, for a long time. I've spent a lot of time on their website looking up stuff because they have agencies and offices throughout the world. Lately I've been looking at their Vienna, Austria branch. They do a lot of drug crime things. I thought that would be really cool because I speak German. However, I haven't really applied or anything yet, but it's an idea in the back of my head. Yeah.
Where does the United States rank in those indexes that you had of the policing and the
Yeah. So for the police, they are ranked 38th, so not very good compared to, the European ones. However, it's not completely bad. We're still in the top 50. And then for human rights, they rank 50th. So there's a lot of areas in which we could improve. Yeah. Thank you for listening.
Very good. Thank you.